I think what this has exposed is what you might call an existential crisis for monarchy.
So Prince Andrew gave up his royal titles on Friday, but there are more questions surrounding him. The Met is looking into claims that Andrew asked one of its officers to try to get hold of personal information about Virginia Giuffre, whose memoir will be published tomorrow. We're going to talk to its ghostwriter on the programme. That's twice I've told you about that now. Let's bring in Tessa Dunlop, royal historian and author of Elizabeth and Philip. Tessa, this is all tawdry and upsetting stuff, isn't it? What do you think is likely to happen next?
It's deeply upsetting, actually, Jane, and so horribly predictable. And what I think I found most disturbing is the way in which the story has been cast through our own mass media. I went to bed on Friday night and Andrew's interview with Emily Maitlis was still being referred to as car crash interview, i.e. terrible for Andrew's image. We're somehow still telling this story from his perspective. It's extraordinary. And then all this discussion about him saving the blushes of the royal family. If you look at that photograph, the infamous photograph with the prince, age 41, and the vulnerable child, age 17, in jeans that she so carefully selected to look like Britney Spears. Nobody's Girl, I thought, was the most, I agree with you, spellbindingly dark retelling of a very sorry, sad life. Rest in peace, Virginia. So she, in that picture, has taken her own life. The individual taking the picture, Jeffrey Epstein, has taken his own life. Ghislaine Maxwell is in prison. The only man walking free, unencumbered, voluntarily giving up his Duke title at the weekend to save his brother's blushes is Prince Andrew. And this entire saga speaks to a made in Great Britain problem, which is the untouchability of the royal family.
Yes, I mean, you have to say, even those of us, I would put myself as a kind of, how would I describe it, a sort of lukewarm monarchist, somebody who believes that there are some decent people in the royal family. And
Sure.
You look at other examples of how other countries do their business and you think, actually, the soft power, it sort of works, let's leave them there. But my goodness, all this is real fuel to those people who believe the monarchy is just a busted flush and has to go.
We desperately need to do more to protect our monarchy. This morning, I was hearing, and I'm a monarchist light, for want of a better expression. I was listening to Bridget Phillipson, the government minister, on the BBC this morning, saying whether there is an amendment to an Act of Parliament to ensure that the Duke's title isn't just put in abeyance, but is actually taken from him. At the moment, you can give and take honours. I'm thinking Nicolae Ceausescu, Robert Mugabe, the late Jimmy Savile all had their honours removed. But you can't with titles at the moment. That would require an act of law. It's just a voluntary gesture at the moment from the Duke. And she said this was up to the king. The king had to lead it, at which point you have to ask which institutions, entirely police themselves. I think the king could do with some help. We are talking about his brother here. I think this needs governmental leadership, actually.
Well, politicians are always incredibly squeamish about involving themselves in regal matters, aren't they? And in fact, it's been very, very difficult for MPs, for example, to bring up the Andrew issue in the Commons. In fact, I'm not sure it's happened at all, has it?
Well, there's several reasons for that. It's a convention that you don't table questions about the royal family on the floor of the House of Parliament. Just if I may quote the former Tory Chancellor, Ken Clarke, he once said, most politicians are so in awe of the royal family that expressions of displeasure from the palace about issues directly bearing on the family can usually produce quite significant policy shifts. We also, of course, Jane, see it within our own trade, journalism. I'm actually in Romania talking to you from Bucharest at the moment, and I thought I was going to have a weekend away from this disgusting story. I feel like I've literally been trolled on the telephone. You are one of a selected few I've responded to. And I think, well, why can't all the other royal spokespeople talk about this properly? And one of the reasons why they're so encumbered and shackled, and Harry was right here, is because most of them feed from the royal trough. So if they really tell you what they think, that actually the royal family isn't examined, isn't subject to the same transparency rules as the rest of us, is exempt from almost all taxation, particularly if you're the sovereign or the successor to the throne. If they really spoke truth to power in that way, they wouldn't then get the best seats in the house for the next soft scoop on what the Princess Princess of Wales is wearing to Wimbledon.
Okay, I mean, strong stuff, Tessa, and I should speak up certainly for Roya Nika and for Kate Mancy, who ply their trade here at News UK and have worked very hard on stories about Prince Andrew. And indeed, it was Kate who revealed that the title of the Duke of York was going at the weekend. But I take your point. These two sides of the royal press equation, they need each other, don't they? But do you think
they absolutely do?
Yeah. Do you think this is the beginning of something very significant in terms of? I mean, let's just be really. I don't know. Are we talking about potentially the beginning of the end of the British monarchy?
No, I don't think we are. But I think what this has exposed is what you might call an existential crisis for monarchy. There's all sorts of hand-wringing about why he's still in the Royal Lodge. The reason he's in the Royal Lodge is partly because, for example, the king must, by definition, be paying his security, which racks up to millions of pounds. How does the king afford to do that? Well, he's not subject to inheritance tax. We talk about the sovereign grant. It's sort of chick feed, the sovereign grant. How did the Queen pay off Andrew to the tune of apparently 12 million? Well, because she gets all the money from the Duchy of Lancaster. William, and I think he's a decent stick, William, despite the fact, he's unaccountable politically. Those spider memos that we once had fun reading from Prince Charles, and the Guardian spent years and years trying to get them through into the public domain. We can no longer table Freedom of Information Acts in light of what the sovereign or indeed the Prince of Wales is doing. David Cameron put a stop to that. And the reason we don't really know what Prince Andrew did as an ill-appointed, that was a Tony Blair mistake, by the way, an ill-appointed trade envoy, is because unlike the rest of us, his files have to remain sealed for 105 years after his birth date.
Right. Well,
just because of his birthright, he's protected.
I mean, let's just agree then, if it's not the beginning of the end of the monarchy, it's the beginning of the end of that level of absurd secrecy. I should say, of course, that Prince Andrew does vigorously deny the accusations against him. Indeed, his statement on Thursday, or Friday, forgive me, was, I mean, it was rather typical of the man. He was still pretending to be something he clearly, well, almost clearly to me anyway, isn't. And there still wasn't a hint of any kind of apology or acknowledgement.
Yeah, and he speaks to his generation, to his class, to his level of entitlement, where he seems unaware of the havoc that his actions have wreaked. It's extraordinary, but it's also horribly predictable. And the pitiful thing about Andrew is he is, if you like, yes, a rotten apple, for want of a better euphemism, but he's a product of the system. And if we want to future-proof the monarchy, make sure this doesn't happen again, we have to insist on higher levels of transparency, and we have to ask questions as to why the beloved Charles, and I'm very fond of the avuncular Charles who toils on late into his 8th decade, I think actually we have to ask how come he's ended up being the richest, bonkers level richest monarch in modern times. And that's because our tax system means he's got extraordinary levels of cash. So problems like Andrew can literally be swept under the carpet, and it can't continue.
Yeah. Except, of course, it hasn't been, has it? That's why we're sitting here having this conversation right now. And I'm just looking at the screens, and you're right. I mean, the king isn't well. We know he's not well. And he's gone, as he should have done, to the synagogue in Manchester today to pay his respects. But the truth is, there'll be a few photographs of that event in the papers tomorrow. But the Andrew story will still be the big one. And that problem is not going away. So what would you like to see happen, Tessa, over the next couple of days and weeks?
I think I heard one royal correspondent saying, they kind of wanted King Charles to make some kind of statement acknowledging Virginia Giuffre's pain, etc. I mean, it's pie in the sky stuff. I think we can't expect the old king to take leadership in that way, in a way that exposes his brother. By all accounts, the Queen asked Charles to look out for Andrew in a sort of pastoral sense. I think it has to come from government. I think a start would be to look at this act, last amended in 1917, to ensure that you could sever the titles of royals who were fighting against the British state. We could insert just a few lines to ensure that if awful things happen, like this ghastly debacle. Then horrific. I mean, so dark. As you've read that memoir, I've got to say, I was just kind of moved to tears by it. And as an oral historian who works with the testimony of women who are remembering back to their teenage years in World War II, I find it a wholly credible account. The fascinating small details that she remembered, the piecing together of this story where she becomes really a pawn at the hands of these men who are almost blind to the damage that they're doing. We can't expect the king to own that kind of stuff on behalf of his brother. I think, no, that we need to see the act amended once and for all, and that would be a really good start. And then I think we need to ask questions about why the royal family are exempt from scrutiny when it comes to their public work. And we need to look at questions of transparency. It's worth bearing in mind, Prince of Wales and the King are some of the biggest business owners and landowners in the country, and yet they're not subject to the levels of scrutiny they need to be given their access to politicians.
Really interesting to talk to you. Thank you very much, Tessa. Really appreciate you coming on the programme this afternoon. So there we are. That's Tessa Dunlop.